Right, okay, hello everyone. So let me just have a very quick look at the grid and everyone who is here, even so you can see me. I'll just quick wait, hello. Thank you for everyone for your time. So let's jump right into it. What's up, madam? 1 second. Simple steps, sort of main characteristics and things to look at when you look at wicked problems and how to help solve them, what you might need in organizations, how you identify that value, and give you one example of a project I did over for BT. And I'll scratch a couple other projects I've done before to elaborate a little bit that point. So just a quick, as a context. So I believe that in order to move forward into the future and in general, we need to really start solving wicked problems, not the ones we're currently trying to solve, which are tame problems, which I will elaborate on. So the difference. And my job is it to help organizations be better at solving wicked problems in a wicked problem world. And therefore, I sort of help create wicked companies, so to speak. So my background's originally in design and technology. I did the original BA in design, and then when I came to the Royal College of Art 20 years ago in a course called Computer-Related Design, which looked a lot at behavior and technology and people and the value they attach to what technology can give them. It's a very IDEO-driven, Stanford-level design thinking-driven course. And shortly after that, I worked at a media lab in Europe in Dublin when it was still existing as a researcher. So again, I looked at a lot of behavior around technology and what people might actually want to do with technology, not just what we're throwing at them. So it was always people first and technology last, and see what we can do with those new things that we have. So since then, I've been working in various shapes or forms, as either working on creative or innovation projects with all sorts of clients from Nissan, P&G. I used to work for some of the big museums here in London, designing interactive galleries, to clients like Kraft and BT. And originally starting looking at innovation, working in teams, trying to find out what the value is and designing solutions for it. And in my latest capacity, I help organizations to create context within which they can actually create those solutions. So helping the strategy and the setup of teams and the processes that organizations need in order to solve things better. So let's then therefore go a little bit into the difference between a tame and a wicked problem. So a tame problem is by definition a problem that you will likely know enough, you have enough information about to start creating a solution that once you've created one solution and you put it out there, implemented it, it's solved, problem is solved. A bridge is a really good example because you can basically have a look at where does the bridge need to go, how far is it, how big does it need to go, how many people, vehicles, anything need to go over there. It's a very engineering kind of problem, or a scientific problem, in a way that it's a very controlled environment, you have enough information, and you then can pretty much predict what's going to happen once the solution is in place, because the problem won't change. Tame problems don't have a tendency to change while you're working on them or after you deployed your solution. Now, wicked problems are different. So wicked problems tend to keep moving and shifting and changing while you're working on them. Examples for wicked problems are crime and poverty and those kind of things. And just by naming those two, you will easily understand that whatever solution I put out there to shift, let's say, the crime rates or what's happening, the problem will adapt itself around it. So you'll never finally solve it, but you have a chance to make it better, right? So, but another characteristic is, therefore, you will never have enough information or enough information available to confidently predict the outcome, which means you have to get into a very different mode of approaching the problem. That is not really an engineering approach. And people identified that starting with things like city planning back in the 50s and 60s. And that's where the idea or the name of wicked problem came from, because they realized that even if we put a solution out there in an urban scenario, it will affect how people interact with it and therefore shift the problem. So the original engineering approach we usually had to solve problems just doesn't apply anymore. We need a new methodology. Problems have been around for a while, and a lot of companies have been amazingly successful tackling them. Best example, Industrial Revolution, where we try to solve mass production. How can we do mass production without robots and communication tools? So this guy, so Henry Ford, managed to enable mass production by de-skilling people, so taking it down from all we normally know and the brains and complex thinking we could normally apply to a job, which makes us actually quite an expensive workforce, and de-skilled people down onto a factory conveyor belt and managed to mass produce by turning people into robots. And he could do so because mass production follows a very simple principle in a recipe, and therefore you can replicate the recipe a million times. It won't change the outcome, and you are going to be able to produce things 1,000 a million times, supplying that for a lot of people. At the time, a great solution for a very tame problem. Yes, so, however, if we're then looking back now at wicked problems, they don't behave the same way as mass production happens, right? So we do often have incomplete, contradictory, or changing requirements on those wicked problems. And in my opinion, the reason why wicked problems are more and more now, and not just in crime and poverty, is because modern technology has enabled us to interact with each other way differently, which means we learn, we react very differently now to these things, which turns a lot of things that previously were quite simple, but let's, for example, say having a bank account, into something quite more complex as an expectation. So now I'm not just having a bank account anymore. I expect companies to help me save money, manage my finances, do all sorts of different things that are quite more like a wicked problem, because I will talk to other people. I will evolve when I learn something in how I manage my money, and I evolve for that. So, you know, organizations have to keep improving what they're offering. Otherwise, I'll go somewhere else. So we today have many, many more wicked problems through the new technology we have, this interconnected network technology, than we had before. But organizations are still unaware of that that's what's been changing. There's been a lot of focus on technology and not enough focus on the fact that it's actually a moving target in a very different sense than just the technology evolving. So modern organizations often therefore are missing the capabilities of solving those wicked problems. One of the good things obviously is that things like Agile and other methodologies help making these things more flexible. So they help us move towards better reacting to those problems. However, if you look at things like this, which is a screenshot of a couple of bots on the stock market that further interact with the stock market and each other and other human buyers, you can easily understand that this is of not just the complexity level, but a thing that keeps evolving, that needs very, very different dynamics and ways for us to de-risk and go out there and produce things in order to tackle these things. So because this is the new value we're creating, but when you're creating this new value, we need to really identify what's the scope of it. What's really the purpose of it? Why are we doing this? And how can we keep it in an area to measure it that it's actually successful and not detrimental to our efforts? So why is and how can we look at wicked problems therefore as a value of the future to focus our ambitions, our activities towards as an organization? So this is a graphic I will spend a tiny bit more time on than some of the other screens, because so this came from a book called The Experience Economy, which was done back in 1999, written by Joe Pine, which I just interviewed for my podcast. And it's a very interesting book, and the graphic is quite revealing towards what's been happening in the market and with companies. So if you look back at, at the left-hand side of it, starting with commodities and products, this is sort of what companies started doing. First, we just got all the ingredients out of the ground, in this case, or harvested them, in this case, on an example of the coffee. And then we produced different kinds of product of coffee. And you could see already a value increase, really monetary, like financial value increase here. But later on, you turned that product into a service. And then what Joe Pine in particular has been talking about 20 years ago was the shift from a service that is a very still transactional value into this experience, which is, this is not just transactional. I actually want to spend more time with what this company has to offer. on the example of Starbucks with back in the days, and still defines itself by not just giving you coffee, but actually giving you an Italian coffee experience by their own definition. And you can see the value of a cup of Starbucks coffee, which quite sits way beyond a Dunkin' Donuts or let's say a McDonald's coffee, because the thing that seems to happen is that whenever these new things are introduced that are more and more are able to create higher value for us, the margins go up. So you're getting more into like what might previously have been a luxury experience and is now a mainstream experience, but that sort of new values there. So on the very right-hand side, that red bar, which is still a bit of an assumption. However, if you follow this complexity level, what you naturally get into is not just having an experience, but actually something that really solves a very complex, if not wicked problem for you. And this sort of seems to be where the market is going. And I'm just saying that there's some evidence for that, and I'll talk you through that in about a second. So the tendency seems to be that all the newer companies are starting to really look at this area of experience and beyond. And as complex as an experience is and what lies beyond, you're likely tapping into a wicked problem, not a tame problem anymore. Because we're not just replicating products anymore, we're actually creating experiences in a very personalized way for lots of different people. And this is such a complexity that you can see that the characteristics of a wicked problem really apply and should be paid attention to. So this is sort of a nice slide I found on a website called intercom.com, which explains this as well a little bit. So when we previously just thought about, we just produce a product, get it out there, customers can be happy. That's the value. More units sold, there you go. Well, it's actually not a thing anymore, because there's already companies out there, and actually what the value is already and has been out there, we just haven't been able to reach it yet, is the fact that actually that person over there doesn't really want just the product. They want to be able to do tricks. They want to impress a girl at the skate park. That's the actual value you're trying to support and create. And this is the thing you should actually be measuring, because if you're measuring that and you're successful on that level, first of all, you can charge more. You make the customer more happier. The customer will more talk about your brand to other people. And generally, the whole organization actually creates a higher value for the customer. So if you're starting to move into that space, as you can see, you're actually tapping into bigger values that you can then describe. And that's what you should be aiming at as an organization. So stop measuring on the product level and start more shifting the value you're measuring towards that new space. And here's a reference from consultancy Bain, and they created a pyramid that's sort of an advanced version of the Maslow pyramid of needs. And if you look at this, so it has on the bottom very functional values for people, and then you get into the emotional level on level 2, and then you get into life changing. Then on the very top, you have this kind of social impact in this one example of self-transcendence. Now, this is an increase of value that you see from the bottom all the way to the top. And as Martha talked about it, and as you might have heard some brands and companies talk about it, they understand that if I'm aiming at some higher value, some higher purpose, the value I'm creating is perceived as higher because I'm starting to have more emotional connection. And Apple is a very good example for that. Life-changing, then you're going really into experiences, because experiences are the kind of things that can change your life. If you can start aiming at measuring how you achieve that as a company, that's the customer value you really want to aim for. To give you an example, going back to this graphic, so you saw added here the logos of Nationwide and Moneybox as a very simple example of this. So I did a project over at Nationwide as well, and don't know if anyone's here. There might have been someone signed up from Nationwide, but I'm going to pull that up for them. So if you look at Nationwide, their main ambition as a company is to give you a mortgage. Their company history is based on the fact that we want to help people be able to get a house, which is actually quite a wicked problem, right? To actually, for you as a human being, to be able to afford a house takes a lot of different things. You have to have the right job, earn the right money, be able to save in the right way. And then eventually you get the mortgage, and then you do that. However, most of what Nationwide's still doing is giving people mortgages and savings accounts. So they give people products. Maybe you can describe it as a service to some extent, but that's about it. What they haven't done is really explore into this wicked problem area of like, well, why wouldn't you redefine Nationwide as helping you save the money for a house rather than getting you a mortgage, right? This would be more expanding it. The problem becomes more complex, but the value is ultimately higher. If you look at a company like Moneybox, they do exactly that. So for them, it's a total commodity to give you an account where you can put some money in. Super simple. It's not even a value for them anymore. They give it out for free. It's like this, it just happens. What they're actually doing on top of it, develop all these different behavioral nudges and things and give you different opportunities, send you little notifications in order to help you become a saver. So they send you a notification on a Friday and go, well, want to maybe save 1 pint and put £5 or £4 into your savings account? There you go. So these are the kind of complex or wicked problems that this company really tries to help you solve, to help you in this case become a saver and invest in an ISA and other ways of investing your money to actually be able to become a saver. So Moneybox already sits way more in that, and therefore the customer value perceived is way higher than often it is with Nationwide. Not to say Nationwide is not a good company. I think they have a great brand. There's really lovely people working there, and it's really highly recognized and trusted. However, as you can see, this should, in theory, be the space they should be aiming at. So this is just to elaborate a little bit on that value. In order to get there and really tackle a wicked problem, there's one thing I really wanted to talk about. And I think apart from talking about the value, as we saw a little bit in what Martha was talking about, and I'm sure what many of you have come across, there's just so many different practices at the moment, and there's new ones coming in every couple of months who actually try to help organizations structure that. They all have their own language, they all have their own ways of measuring things, turning things into numbers that sometimes are arbitrary, sometimes are not, sometimes are quantitative, sometimes are qualitative. So as to make, if we really want to solve these problems and get to that value, we really have to bring all these practices together. And these are just some I listed here that I've come across in my last 20 years, and it's just the top ones, let's say, I come across on a daily basis. There's obviously tons more. And I used to work obviously as a designer, but also as a coder. So I see all these different things that come into play in order to produce things, do things, what we perceive as value from a different practice perspective. And as a shout out, as a big ask, really is like, the more you talk to other people in your organization, the more you probably will find to be able to collaborate together to actually get into that value. Because alone with a single practice, single department, you'll just not get there. If we keep having these silos, we're not going to get there. As a small extra point to get to that value. Because this is the world we're actually looking at. So this slide, which I nicked from Roberta, who might have joined us tonight, is this is actually sort of this is the real world, right? So we can try to map these things out and try to attach numbers and org charts to all these things, but I think we all know in reality it's a little bit more like that. I mean, this is obviously an extreme case for comedic purpose, but this is the world we're dealing with. This is the wicked problem of an organization, as much as the wicked problem out there in reality we're trying to deal with as an organization. So as an organization, we're actually not too far away from how reality looks like. We're as flawed, not very logic. So, embracing that and trying to measure that and being aware of this particular fact hopefully helps us all to a little bit describe better what value, not just what value we're aiming at, but how we can get there. So, there is no real right and wrong. It's not really a black and white. It's all a gray mishmash of people trying to do things and keep evolving whenever they learn something or have a different experience and doing things next time a little bit differently. So we should all remind ourselves to that if we're aiming, trying to even start describing what the value really looks like. So here's a couple of comments from various people I worked with or came across. So over a project with OBT, Rachel High, Managing Director in BTIT, her biggest value, for example, internally was just to get the teams more flexible. So we worked on that project, talk about it in about a second, to actually do these things in order to hit that value better and just actually, describe it easier, have people chasing any problem that just pops up, because problems change. So you need flexibility. That's the agility. It's not just that teams can work in Agile, but also that you can throw them or reorganize people quickly at different problems. So that's one of her values that she wants to create in the company in order to achieve that. Tim Carmichael, British Army, is great to talk to someone who's working with the military. You know, he gave a really great talk on saying, you know, we as the British Army does not solve things horizontally anymore. It's all, does not solve vertically anymore. It's all horizontal. It's all a mix of things. It's more flexibility everywhere. If we don't do that, we cannot tackle those problems. So no, and knowing that from someone who comes from a very hierarchical, seemingly hierarchical organization, to say, actually, it's not just up and down, it's actually a lot horizontal, is quite valuable to hear and know that they're actually doing the same thing that a lot of other commercial companies are doing. I'll use Airbnb as well. She had really great stories on, you know, they understand the journey is never ending, right? So the value they're getting out of is well this approach to saying, okay, there is no finite value. It's always just, is this a little bit better or is it a little bit worse? If it's a little bit worse, we discard it. If it's a bit better, we go for it. And then we look what happens after. 1 second, please. Sorry. The really interesting thing was that she said, you know, whenever they change something on their website, things will be affected. It just happens, you know, whenever they open one door, there's 2 more opening afterwards. Yeah. So it's a continuous thing. So 1 second. Yes, no? There's better. 1 second. Sorry about that. iPad ran out of battery. So back there. So this is sort of trying to put this in a slide scope. Let's talk a bit more concrete about key aspects and examples on beyond or trying to get towards wicked problems. So the 3 simple parts, and you know, there's maybe some magic or some romanticism in 3, is really look at the why before the how. So the why is where you often get your value and your value descriptions from, right? And again, as Martha said, the why would be, we're trying to solve this wicked problem, but how we do that will continuously change, right? So that means that often your measurements and your value descriptions will adopt and they will change. So giving you a very consultant answer, so like, it depends, like you can start with one set of value descriptions, but you might shift them because you learn. So you should constantly learn, you should be able to adopt and shift them. So that's sort of one first answer there, to really keep the focus on the why. The other part that I've seen a lot in many projects, and oftentimes, unfortunately, to mislead companies into thinking they're going to create some benefits or create some extra value and didn't, is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. And I'm sure a lot of you have come across where you look at companies trying to do innovation or something else, create more value, but actually before you know it, all they're looking for is efficiency, and efficiency just doesn't have a big return. And there's quite a couple of studies on saying that if you invest $1 million into efficiency and $1 million into effectiveness, the effectiveness will actually drive the value. Efficiency is like a wall, you're getting closer and closer and closer, but you never break through, right? So actually, as a value, you should look for the effectiveness aspect, and it should be the effectiveness of solving the wicked problem. The efficiency, I think these days, as much, and we talked about that 2 days ago, we talk about Six Sigma and efficiency and trying to reduce variance. There is a place and time for that, but there's more and more studies that come out and basically say, you know what, it's a commodity, you're not going to get value out of that. Make sure that obviously you're efficient in a way, or that your product is up to scratch in terms of quality, but don't spend too much time trying to keep that efficient and more efficient, because the investment will just not create more value. It's been proven more and more that actually, if you look at it from an effectiveness perspective, that drives you forward. So that's sort of the second point I'm trying to make as a major part to trying to align yourself with the correct characteristics solving wicked problems. Then the third part, which you're all probably very, very familiar with, is experimentation. But experimentation is very important, not just because it generally de-risks even a tame problem, but a wicked problem in particular, because if a wicked problem in simple terms is basically a moving target, you need to take these small steps and as many variations as possible trying to hit it. and you get lucky if you hit it. And as you know, Jeff Bezos says, you know, that they think they're doing the right thing by running 1,000 experiments, and they know that the 2 or 3 of them that actually succeed so exponentially, they're actually breaking through that value wall and actually really get there. And they're probably doing that because they have the wicked problem of how do we get things to people and make them buy more. That's their target. That's the only target they have. That's the only value they're chasing. That's it. So those are sort of in simple 3 parts of what elements need to exist in an organization to help tackle these things and get that value. I just walked through that a little bit. There's one really nice quote here at the bottom from, I think, someone from Microsoft CEO or someone who said, you know, love the problem, not the solution. Don't get hung up with the solutions, because your solutions will look different in 6 months, and they should so, because you should evolve. So, okay, you should reevaluate, remeasure, and something else pops up. It's like, oh, you know what? Actually, it's not that piano players buy us most. It's actually the people who drive the bus. So let's measure differently and then chase that. You should be able to do that, meaning that you should be able to value that. It's not an easy thing to do, obviously, if you have certain cycles in your financial and quarterly things, right? But that's unfortunately a new thing we need to start doing more and more, breaking this down, evolving quicker. I'm not going to go through that because I think it gets quite detailed. Only the middle part, and I think there's something as well where Martha said this earlier, you know, you behave like what you measure. And there's a really great quote here in the middle left-hand side where Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer, said, he said, you know, if we would think the universe is made of cheese, we would build a cheese telescope and look for cheese. Because that's how we define everything. Therefore, that's the only thing we can do. That's the only tool we build, and therefore, that's the only information we're getting back. So that's not the right approach, right? That's where we have to have the variance and reconsider of what are things actually made of? Do we understand it? You know, service designers like me like to say, treat everything as an assumption, everything. Because it might not just change tomorrow, but also we've been going through 20 years or more now, technology change, behaviors have changed, landscape have changed, the way things grow, the way things behave has changed. So, you know, don't tell me that because you have 10 years experience that you know what you're talking about. I rather always step back and say, and ask questions and say, I don't know. Let's go and ask someone. Let's go and test it. Let's go and throw it out there. Talked about this, experimentation. How are we with time, Barry? Are we all right? Or do you want me to speed up a bit? I'm nearly done. Might want to unmute. Are we okay? Okay, I'll just skip that because I don't know how it works.
If you could try and wrap up in the next couple of minutes, that'd be great. And then
yes, exactly.
So just a few questions. Brilliant.
No worries. So just going to bring in a very concrete example. Da Vinci project over at BTIT. So I was leading as a design principal at the time, big transformation project to turn a lot of teams, and here's some stats on that, to turn a lot of existing teams into new teams work in a new way. And the big thing for this discussion would be that we introduced new ways to the team, which they never had to do before, to help them evaluate and define the value they were actually creating with the research they were doing. So we taught them research, yes, and we taught them business casing, and we taught them DVF from IDEO, so desirability, viability, feasibility, as a simple way to make an initial business case, and then detail it out to really that every team was able to, in the end, stand up in front of the CEO and say, this is our proposition. This is what we're going to save. This is the customer value we create. And this is the business value we create. And this is why we should be doing this, right? And it's totally doable. So it took us a year when I left over there and handed over to, which is now a big BT team. And they've just been starting to roll this program out to somebody, the rest of the group, BT, like OpenReach and other ones. We trained tons of people, millions of business benefits, and we trained people to really understand how better to define value in a way of the same language that the C-level and the leadership actually listens to. And it's quite valuable to have that same language happening so that everyone from top to bottom actually knows what we're talking about, what we're after. And so that was quite a great success there, which is still ongoing. To give you one example, so we had one team that looked after versioning. So they looked at if they might actually buy in one versioning tool. I think they want to all go for GitHub in this case instead of Subversion. And they looked at, are we going to introduce it to India and then they're going to do GitHub as well, because Europe's only doing GitHub. There's different products there. Can we simplify it? What actually turned out after I did a bit of research was that, oh, actually, no, that doesn't make any sense because the projects don't overlap. So there's no conflict in code. So we don't need to do that. We don't need to spend millions to train thousands of people into a tool they don't need to learn because they all come out and know Subversion and they're fine with it. It's all good enough. But what they actually found was that there were some vulnerabilities in some open source libraries. And they found that there was a risk that might cause a lot of damage to the customers, and basically fixed that by scanning open libraries better and created the service around that. And they calculated the value of that, which ended up in a cut from a couple of £1,000 in general savings into a £300 million risk mitigation effort, which BT was obviously very happy about. So the point I'm trying to make is really, if you help people to look at things and what the value is, and they can figure it out themselves, and they're flexible about it, you can actually have a team there, let them pivot, and actually create the value they actually should. So that goes again for flexibility as an example. So that's, yeah, so maybe last point to make is just that, we tend to have a bit of a what some people call the air sandwich between leadership and so-called the ground troops, so most of us. And the communication between that about where we're aiming at and what we should actually be doing, and the learnings. And I don't always see the learnings from the ground to go back up. It's probably one of the things that we're missing. And this can only work if the value and the language you use for the value we identify is streamlined, so that the leadership can listen to the same stuff the ground troops are talking about, meaning that if I have a business case and I can present, that anyone in the team essentially can present it to the CEO. That's what you should aim at. And that's the way you should describe the value. Use the same language. And that's pretty much it. So, I'm trying to put that in one sentence. It's probably not quite right, but, as a step, look at the wicked problem. That's where your big new value space is. And use that to start defining the value you want to create. And then start chasing it through experimentation and all those things, and be flexible on even the way you describe the value. That's sort of it. So yeah, I wrote about sort of the first part of what I just walked you through. I wrote a book about that last year, over the last 2 years. There is a podcast called The Wicked Podcast, hey, big surprise, as well, where we look at a lot of other business books and how this all ties together. We look at constant learning, we look at innovation, all sorts of different books we looked at, and sort of try to pull out the takeaways, because no one has time to read all those books, so we're reading it for you, in order to fit into how we better solve wicked problems. And that's me. So I hope that was valuable to you.